In this video, we're going to have a look at the different types of render pipelines supported in Unity. When you start a new project with Unity 2019, you will see the options you can pick from. What should you pick? What's the difference? What's the best option for my project? We're going to answer all of those questions, but also look at what it means for the assets you're using. Before we start, I would like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for the absolutely amazing support. In order to showcase the new high-definition render pipeline, Unity released the gorgeous The Heretic short, which showcased a lot of the new capabilities. We can see VFX graph in action from the start with new particle effects. We see some good-looking volumetric fog and lighting, and much more. But what exactly is a render pipeline? To keep it really simple, a render pipeline is simply a feature that allows for rendering. In practice, this can be seen with how lighting is handled in Unity, but also material shaders and visual effects. When starting a new project, we have the choice between the default render pipeline, URP and HDRP. I'm not going to spend too much time on the default render pipeline, as this is something we've been using for years. So let's start off with URP. The Universal Render Pipeline, previously known as the Lightweight Render Pipeline, is the go-to option for anyone creating a game that is intended for multiple platforms, including less powerful options like the Nintendo Switch, mobile platforms, and VR. A couple of the pros are, like the previous name already suggested, it's lightweight and won't have much of a negative impact on performance. It also supports shader graph and the VFX graph, new Unity packages that are visual scripting solutions for the creation of particle and material shaders. We'll have a closer look at what can be accomplished with those in a bit. On top of that, there is a built-in post-processing support as well. A couple of the cons, for now anyway, are the lack of volumetric lighting and ambient occlusion. This list of cons used to be a lot longer, but Unity has been working hard to fill the gaps, so I wouldn't be surprised if both of those cons will disappear as well. Let's have a look at HDRP, or also known as the High Definition Render Pipeline. HDRP is targeted towards consoles and high-end PCs, with the inclusion of ray tracing targeting only the newest graphics cards and the upcoming next generation consoles. Now, to be clear, you don't need to use ray tracing, it's just one of those options that is enabled. Like URP, we have shader graph and VFX graph support, built-in post-processing, tessellation, and volumetric lighting. Obviously, there's much more to it, but we're going to have a closer look in a bit. The one obvious con for HDRP is performance. As this is targeted towards high-end PCs and consoles, it also requires more power. When starting a new project with Unity, we have a couple of options. So we have 3D, 2D, HDRP, and URP. Now, the important thing here is that you do not have to decide right from the start. You can always start with a default built-in render pipeline project, so a normal 3D project, and import HDRP or URP during your process. Now, one thing to do keep in mind is that you will have to convert all of the materials, and when it comes to assets you bought in the asset store, often they do not support all three. So that's something you definitely need to keep in mind. Now, if you are going for a polygon type look, URP is often going to be the go-to solution. If you are going to go for a realistic or semi-realistic look, most of the time you will find this solution with HDRP. Now, why would you use the default built-in render pipeline? And I'm sure some will disagree, but never. Honestly, never. I have used the default render pipeline for my tutorial project, and I would honestly never consider it for a normal project. The difference between the built-in render pipeline and HDRP and URP honestly is quite big, and not just for the supported apps or the nice stats. Just basic lighting and shadowing just seems completely awful in comparison. Now let's have a look at what these actually look like once we have them in an open project. Now let's start off with the default render pipeline, so the built-in one. This is a normal scene, so this is the sample scene you have by default. We have our main camera, our directional light, and that's pretty much it. Now there's not much you need to do with this one. It will just work by default, and well, the results are exactly what you're used to. Now if we switch to URP, we have this sample scene included, and it shows this, well, this work set really. Now I think the main reason really why this is included is to show what lighting is capable of. And the nice thing here is that we actually have this same scene in HDRP as well, so we can actually easily make a comparison. So this is what it looks like in URP, and it looks great. We see some really nice lighting going on, but at the same time it's also quite hard. Materials don't really reflect light as good as they could, and don't get me wrong, it's definitely not bad. It's really good and a nice upgrade compared to the built-in render pipeline, but there is a reason why HDRP is called the high definition one. So when we look at HDRP in the same scene, we will see different types of lighting and shadows going on, and the difference, well, it's quite obvious. And again, it really depends on what you're going for. If you are going for a console project, then I would definitely, or high-end PC, I would definitely recommend using HDRP. But if you are going to go for a more general platform release, URP is an absolutely amazing choice, and I wouldn't regret it for a bit. Now for this little experiment, I'm going to add a sphere to all of these projects. So let's add this sphere. Let's make sure it's centered and that it's big enough. So let's make it 5 by 5 by 5. Going to zoom in a bit, and yeah, here we have it. We're going to drag our material on top of it. Going to turn off the raster here. And this is what it looks like, and by default it just works. So we have our main camera, directional light, and the sphere. So nothing exciting is going on. When we check it in our game scene, it looks good. Now if we're going to do the same with URP, so I created a new scene here. I'm going to add this sphere as well. I'm going to make it the same size. So let's make it 5 by 5 by 5 as well. And you will see it renders just fine. Let's drag on our new material. Let's do that in the correct scene. There we go. Let's make sure this is actually set to opaque from the start, just to make sure it all looks the same. There we go. So yeah, lighting is already quite different, as you can see. By default, it doesn't really look the same. And now we're going to have a look at HDRP, and from the start you will see there is a difference. So I created a new scene, going to add this sphere here, and as you can see it's all really dark. Now reason for that is that HDRP needs one extra step, so by default it won't actually work. So as you can see, this is all, well, the coloring seems off, let's just put it like that, and that's because we need to add something extra. So as you can see, this looks off, and we need to add a sky and fog volume. Now you may think, well, that's awful, you need to do an extra step, and that's not all that great. But the sky and fog volume is something we'll have a look at in a bit, and it's actually one of the best things about HDRP. So yes, it's one extra step, and yes, I would have appreciated it if creating a new scene would just automatically add that, just like the camera and light, but unfortunately it doesn't. So when we do a comparison of these three next to each other, we'll see there's actually quite a big difference. So the way lighting in the environment works is completely different in HDRP by default. Now obviously you can just match similar results if you want to, and it's really not that hard to do. But this is because of the sky and fog volume. So the sky and fog volume adds an actual environment to the scene, and it's not just basic lighting. So we'll have a look at that in a bit. We have this scene open right now, and this is the material we applied. So this is the default render pipeline. We have opaque, transparent options. We can alter the metallic value, we can alter smoothness, all pretty standard. We can change the colors, etc, etc. Now we have normal maps, height maps, and all of these good things, and we have emission options as well with some lighting details. So all of the standard stuff. And when we look at the options here, we have unlit materials as well. Now I'm highlighting this because this is something we'll see with the other render pipelines as well. And well, these are the options you have. Now if I would go with transparent, and that's the one I'm going to demonstrate, we don't really see much of an option here. And when we go with a value like this, well, this is what transparent really looks like. We can alter smoothness and metallic, but as you can see, no longer really makes it transparent at all. It becomes, well, a bit of a weird, we get a bit of a weird result. Let's just put it like that. So yeah, let's keep the metallic value a bit low when using transparent, and this is the result we have. Now when we have a look at URP, and let's bring up the material, we have a bunch of different options. Now I'm going to turn off that grid, and we have metallic specular as a workflow mode, opaque, transparent, rendering. So this is really interesting. So it will render both sides if possible, if needed. So think of, for example, grass, hair, etc. This is a pretty big advantage. So we're going to go with transparent here as well. Now, as you can see, rendering both when using a sphere is not really the result you want. So we're just going to keep it with front for now. Let's lower this value a bit. And if we switch to specular, we get this result. So it's slightly different. We obviously can play around with the smoothness value as well. And yeah, the result is pretty different. It's not all that super great either. And when we go into the shader options, we have lit, simple lit, and we have unlit as well. So quite important. And as you can see, there's not really that much we can do here. There are some limits as well. Now if we have a look at the same material in HDRP, then let's open this up. We have opaque and transparent, and we have the same alpha clipping. It's double-sided here, so it's just named slightly different when it comes to URP, but we have a couple of more options when it comes to material types, and some of these are actually really interesting. So if we go for the same transparent look here, a lot more options appear. As you can see, it's a lot more in depth. Now setting this to a sort of semi-transparent is all the same, so that doesn't really change much. We can change metallic values as well, and as you can see, this has a really different result than we saw with the built-in render pipeline. The result is really different. Now I'm going to drag this up a bit because we have our fog volume messing around a bit, and I'll explain that in a bit. Let me actually turn that off for now. There we go. So we have our material, and if I would now change this to, I have no idea how to pronounce it, we actually will have a different type of effect. So as you can see, we have this gloss type of effect, and I'm not really showcasing this the best possible way, but the type of light reflection you will have with glass can actually be achieved with this material effect, and you will see the rainbow colors glass often has, and I'm not, again, not really showcasing the best possible way, but yeah, it's one of those nice additions. And again, this is going for realism, so as you can see, this is one of the differences. Now, another big difference with HDRP is the sky and fog volume I mentioned. And the sky and fog volume, well, like the name says, does sky and fog. And one of the nice things here is by default it will use the physically based sky, and I'm going to turn all of these on. This is the tint used by default and actually plays a rather big part. I'm going to keep it just a brown, but you can change that around. And don't know why all of these are just off by default. It just makes more sense to turn them on. But as you can see, there's a lot we can do here. Now I'm going to focus on our directional light for a moment. And if I turn this directional light, we can actually have a night and day setting with just the built-in renderer for the sky. So this is actually really, really cool. This is one of the nice things of the sky and fog volume. So yes, it's one extra step you will need to perform, but honestly, how cool is it that this is just a built-in feature? It's, my opinion, it's really great. So yeah, one extra step, but it's definitely worth it. So that's one of the nice things we can see here. Now, outside of the optional differences when it comes to lighting, and there's just so much here, you have to keep in mind what type of project am I going for. So am I going for a console, mobile, VR, or just regular PC project? And this will basically decide what you need to go for in terms of URP or HDRP. It is really that simple. Now, if you're still on the built-in render pipeline and are considering to either jump to URP or HDRP, one of the convincing reasons would be the VFX graph and shader graph. And in order to demonstrate what this is, I'm simply going to right-click shader. We have a bunch of options, as you can see. There's some ray tracing here as well. But we're going to go with a basic lit graph here. Let's call it testing. And just to be clear, I'm not going to create anything here. It's just more in order to demonstrate what this visual scripting really is. And there's so many nodes and there's so many things you can do here. We can create some properties as well, and these properties are basically things you can customize. So if I drag in color and would drag it on our base color here, save this one, go to our scene, drag this testing shader on our material, we can see it in action here, and the property I just created will be apparent here, and we can alter these values. And yes, this was a horrible example, but it's just to demonstrate what it does. Now, just to show off some of the capabilities, we have this dissolve shader, which is pretty cool. And if we open this up, we can see it's just a bunch of nodes combined, and as you can see, it's not even that many, but we have some really, really cool results. Now, if I click on our sphere, check our properties, we see a lot of options here. Right now the edges are blue. We can change this to yellow, which is pretty cool. Change the width of the edges, for example. Oh, that's the wrong way. But yeah, we can have some really cool results. And that's the nice thing with shader graph. You can get some awesome results for shaders. This is really bright. But let's have a look at VFX graph. Now VFX graph in essence works the same. We right click and we create a visual effect graph. Let's call this testing as well. And if we open this up, we get a really similar look, same properties we can adjust, and yeah, we have particle effects and we have a lot of things we can do here. So again, this is all node based as well, works really similar. Now I'm not going to create something really interesting here. This is more something for a different tutorial. If I drag this in, I'm not even sure something would happen, but yeah, it does actually. And as you can see, a basic particle effect, no textures, etc. Now I'm going to kick this out and I'm going to drag in a more advanced result of what you could achieve. And as you can see here, this looks a lot cooler. And the nice thing here is that we have these same options. So right now everything is blue, we can make it red, even customize these, change lighting, we can change the amount of particles, and all of these are the nodes you basically set yourself. So we can alter our size here and get a completely different results by altering these values, which is, yeah, it's pretty cool. So shader graph and VFX graph are definitely great reasons to switch over to URP or HDRP if you're still on the built-in render pipeline. Now, if you have a lot of assets that do not work with URP or HDRP, it's worth considering still, but I would definitely keep checking the asset store because a lot of popular assets have now support for URP or HDRP. So it's definitely worth considering. So unless you have a lot of assets that do not work with these new solutions, I would not stick with the built-in render pipeline, wouldn't even consider it, as I'm pretty sure at least URP will be the default in 2020 at some point anyway, once it goes out of beta. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.